In the dead zones of Andros Station, trust was a rare commodity, and Seryn knew she had none to spare. The dim glow of emergency lights cast long shadows across the hangar as Seryn adjusted the strap of her energy pack. The cold air smelled of rust and stale fuel, the kind of metallic tang that clung to the back of your throat. Her companion, a reptilian Velcran with scales as black as obsidian, stood silently beside her, his vertical pupils flickering toward every sound. "You're sure this is the right place?" Seryn asked, her voice low but firm. The Velcran tilted his head, his sharp teeth glinting as he replied, "The Syndicate doesn't make mistakes. This is where the shipment will arrive, unless you've brought your own incompetence." Seryn shot him a glare but said nothing. What drove an ex-military engineer to smuggle stolen tech through one of the most dangerous sectors in the galaxy? And why would a Velcran assassin risk his own neck for the same cause? The answers lay in the relentless reach of the Vorn Dominion, a regime that consumed planets like fire through dry fields. Seryn's people had been among the first to fall, their cities reduced to husks, their fleets scattered. The Velcran had no love for the Dominion either. His kind had been hunted to the brink of extinction. Necessity forged strange alliances, and tonight they both gambled everything to secure weapons powerful enough to spark rebellion. The distant rumble of engines grew louder, shaking the walls of the hangar. A sleek freighter descended into view, its blackened hull marked with the scars of countless battles. Seryn's fingers brushed the hilt of the plasma blade at her side as the ship's ramp lowered with a hiss. From the shadows emerged a figure clad in battered combat armor. "You're late," the Velcran hissed. The armored figure chuckled, distorted through their helmet. "You're lucky I came at all." They heaved a crate onto the floor. Its locks hissed as it opened, revealing rows of plasma rifles. The sharp sound of metal scraping against metal filled the hangar as Seryn snapped the plasma rifle's power cell into place. Her eyes darted between the Velcran, who was crouched with predatory focus, and the smuggler, now retreating toward their ship. The alarm blared louder, its wailing pitch cutting through the tension like a blade. "Dominion patrols don't show up for nothing," Seryn muttered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "What the hell were you carrying that flagged them?" The smuggler paused at the base of the ramp, their helmet turning slightly toward her. "Not my problem. I made the delivery. You wanted toys to fight the Dominion? Guess they noticed." Their voice carried a tone of amused detachment that made Seryn's blood boil. "Coward!" the Velcran hissed, the sharp ridge of his tail bristling. "Run back to your hole, Syndicate rat. We'll handle this." The smuggler gave a mocking salute before disappearing into the ship, the ramp hissing shut behind them. Seryn bit her tongue, focusing instead on the radar display flickering on her wrist console. The approaching vessel was closing in fast, its speed indicating a strike craft rather than a standard patrol ship. 2 minutes, maybe less, she said, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. "They're not here for negotiations." The Velcran clicked his tongue in frustration. "We can't hold this position. Your human engineering is barely enough to slow them down, let alone stop them." Seryn ignored the jab and activated a control panel on the wall. The hangar's secondary doors began to grind open, revealing a series of narrow maintenance tunnels. "Then we make them fight on our terms. These lead to the reactor core. If we can bottleneck them there..." The Velcran's eyes gleamed with dark amusement. "You plan to blow up the station? A bold move for someone who swore to save lives." Seryn hesitated, her grip tightening on the rifle. "If it comes to that, I'll do what I have to. Now move." As the two disappeared into the tunnels, the hangar doors burst open and the Dominion craft touched down with ruthless precision. As the duo maneuvers through the labyrinthine maintenance tunnels, the tension grows thicker with every step. But before we dive deeper into this heart-pounding escape, don't forget to support the resistance. Hit the like button if you're enjoying the story so far, and subscribe to the channel to join us for more thrilling adventures. Your support fuels this fight and keeps the rebellion alive. The maintenance tunnels were a labyrinth of corroded pipes and flickering lights, their stale air carrying the faint scent of coolant. Seryn led the way, her rifle held tightly as she scanned each corner with practiced precision. Behind her, the Velcran moved silently, his claws clicking faintly against the metal floor. "We won't outrun them," he muttered, his tone low but resolute. "They'll send drones into the tunnels, and when they find us, the real hunters won't be far behind." Seryn stopped at a junction, her wrist console displaying a schematic of the station. She pointed toward a narrow shaft ahead. "The drones can't navigate tight spaces like that. If we can lure them into the wrong path, we'll buy some." "In time," the Velcran let out a sharp hiss. "Time for what? You think we can outthink the Dominion's algorithms with a few diversions?" "Do you have a better idea?" she snapped, her patience wearing thin. Without waiting for an answer, she activated the console, rerouting power to seal off several nearby passages. The tunnels groaned as heavy bulkheads slammed shut, creating a series of false leads. The Velcran clicked his tongue, but his sharp gaze betrayed a hint of approval. "Not bad for human improvisation." The sound of skittering metal echoed down the corridor, sending a chill through Seryn's spine. The drones had entered the tunnels. She gestured silently toward the shaft, and the two squeezed into the cramped space just as the mechanical whir of propulsion grew deafeningly close. From their hiding spot, Seryn caught a glimpse of the drones, sleek machines, each no larger than a torso, with multi-limbed appendages bristling with sensors and weapons. They zipped past without hesitation, following the false path she had created. As the noise faded, Seryn exhaled sharply. They took the bait. For now. The Velcran's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "We're not safe yet. The hunters will come next." She nodded grimly, adjusting the rifle against her shoulder. "Then we keep moving. Reactor core is 2 levels down. If we're lucky, we won't need to blow the whole place, just enough to send a message." The descent to the reactor core was a precarious one. The shaft they had entered narrowed further, forcing Seryn to maneuver with one hand while clutching her rifle tightly in the other. Above, faint vibrations echoed through the metal walls, a haunting reminder that the Dominion's forces were closing in. "This plan of yours better work," the Velcran hissed, his tail coiling tightly to avoid scraping the walls. "If we're cornered down here, there won't be enough of us left to send a message." Seryn didn't reply immediately. Her focus was on the wrist console, its display flickering as she tried to override the station's emergency locks. Finally, a soft chime indicated success, and a nearby hatch hissed open, revealing the reactor control chamber. The room was bathed in an eerie blue light, its center dominated by a cylindrical energy core, pulsating with rhythmic intensity. Stepping inside, Seryn's gaze darted to the console banks lining the walls. She moved quickly, her fingers dancing over the controls. "The core has a fail-safe," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "I can trigger a localized overload, enough to wipe out the Dominion forces without destroying the entire station." The Velcran positioned himself near the entrance, his serrated blade glinting in the blue glow. "And what happens if their hunters get here before you're done?" "I'll need 5 minutes," Seryn replied. "Can you hold them off that long?" The Velcran bared his sharp teeth in a predatory grin. "Let them come. I've been waiting to taste Dominion blood again." Before Seryn could respond, a harsh clang echoed through the chamber, followed by the unmistakable whine of cutting tools. The hunters were breaching the hatch. "Looks like you'll get your chance," she muttered, gripping her rifle as she turned to face the entrance. The Velcran stood poised, every muscle tensed like a coiled spring. 5 minutes, human. Don't waste them." As the first sparks flew from the sealed hatch, Seryn locked her focus on the console. Her fingers moved with precision, racing against the inevitable chaos about to erupt. The sealed hatch burst open with a deafening screech, showering sparks into the reactor chamber. Seryn didn't look up, her focus locked on the console as she bypassed layer after layer of security protocols. Each successful override brought her closer to triggering the localized overload, but the pressure of time weighed heavily. The Velcran was already in motion. With a guttural snarl, he lunged at the first Dominion hunter to breach the doorway. The machine resembled a spider. Forged from dark alloy, its limbs tipped with serrated blades. The Velcran's serrated knife found its mark, severing a limb with a brutal strike. Sparks erupted, and the drone reeled back, but two more emerged from behind it, their movements unnervingly precise. 2 minutes! Seryn shouted, glancing over her shoulder. Just hold them for 2 minutes! Do I look like a chronometer? To you? The Velcran barked, his blade slicing through another drone sensor module. A third machine leapt onto his back, its claws digging into his armor. With a feral growl, he slammed himself against the wall, crushing it in a shower of shattered plating. Seryn's fingers flew across the controls, sweat beading on her brow as the core's energy levels spiked. A warning alarm blared from the console. Core destabilization initiated. Localized containment failure in 90 seconds. She exhaled sharply. It was working, but now they had to survive long enough for the overload to complete. Behind her, the Velcran was slowing. His strikes were still vicious, but the sheer number of drones pouring into the chamber began to overwhelm him. "Seryn," he growled, his voice strained. "If this overload of yours doesn't kill them all, I'll make sure you regret it." Seryn clenched her jaw, grabbing her rifle as the final command executed. "Done! Fall back to the core. We'll use the energy surge to shield us." The Velcran hesitated for only a moment before disengaging from the melee, retreating to the base of the core. Seryn pressed herself against the reactor as the energy field began to hum louder, its glow intensifying. "Brace yourself," she yelled. The chamber erupted in a blinding wave of light and sound. The chamber was eerily quiet, save for the faint crackle of scorched metal. Seryn's vision swam as she pulled herself up, the acrid smell of burnt circuitry filling the air. Around her, the remains of Dominion drones lay scattered, their limbs twisted and blackened. She wiped sweat from her face, her chest heaving as she turned toward the reactor. "Velcran!" she called, her voice hoarse. She stumbled forward, spotting him slumped against a wall. His armor was cracked and smoldering, dark blood oozing from deep gashes across his side. For a moment panic gripped her, but then his eyes opened, faint and flickering like dying embers. "Still breathing, human," he rasped, a weak grin tugging at his bloodied face. "You'll have to try harder than that to kill me." Seryn let out a shaky breath, crouching beside him. She pressed a med patch to his wound, the sealant hissing as it worked. "Don't tempt me," she said, trying to mask her worry with humor. "Can you stand?" The Velcran grunted, leaning on her as she helped him up. "You'll regret this." The station groaned beneath their feet, the aftermath of the reactor overload leaving its mark. Lights flickered sporadically, and faint vibrations coursed through the walls. Seryn checked her wrist console. No immediate signs of pursuit. Still, her gut twisted. "They'll send more," the Velcran muttered. "They always send more." A distant clang echoed through the tunnel, sharp and deliberate. Both froze, their eyes locking. The sound repeated, steady and ominous, growing louder with each beat. "What now?" Seryn whispered, gripping her rifle. The Velcran's gaze darkened. Something worse. The clang abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with an unseen threat. Seryn's pulse thundered in her ears as she scanned the shadows, every muscle tensed. "Get ready!" the Velcran hissed. "This isn't over!" The silence was unbearable, pressing against Seryn's chest like a weight. She tightened her grip on the rifle, her knuckles white as she scanned the darkness ahead. The Velcran leaned heavily on her shoulder, his breathing labored but steady. The clang had stopped, but the oppressive sense of being watched remained. "Whatever it is, it's toying with us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The Velcran straightened slightly, his claws twitching as he growled. "They don't play games, human. They hunt." Suddenly, the corridor behind them erupted in a violent explosion, the force hurling Seryn and the Velcran forward. She hit the ground hard, the rifle slipping from her grasp as the shockwave reverberated through the tunnel. Her ears rang and her vision blurred, but she forced herself upright, scrambling to grab her weapon. Emerging from the smoke was a figure unlike anything she'd seen. Taller than a human, its body was encased in sleek black armor that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Its face was a blank visor, reflecting the chaos it had created. In its hands, it wielded a weapon that pulsed with an eerie blue glow. "The executioner," the Velcran rasped, dragging himself upright. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, but his eyes burned with defiance. "The Dominion's elite enforcer. We don't survive this." Seryn swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. "We've come too far to die here." Executioner moved with terrifying speed, closing the distance between them in seconds. Seryn fired, her plasma rounds slamming into its armor, but they barely slowed it down. It raised its weapon, a blast of blue energy narrowly missing her as she dove to the side. The Velcran charged with a roar, his blade aiming for a weak point in the armor. The executioner countered effortlessly, striking him down with brutal precision. Seryn screamed, firing again, but it was no use. The Velcran collapsed motionless. Adrenaline surged through her as she backed toward the reactor core. Her mind raced. She could see only one option now, one that might save the rebellion at the cost of everything else. With trembling hands, she activated the core's failsafe. "If I die, I'm taking you with me." The reactor core roared to life, its pulsating energy casting the chamber in blinding waves of blue and white. Seryn stood her ground, her back against the console, as alarms blared around her. The executioner turned its blank visor toward the core, as if realizing too late what she had done. "You think this ends here?" it said, its voice distorted and hollow, echoing through the chamber like a ghost. Seryn's lips curled into a bitter smile, her hands trembling as they clutched the rifle. "I don't think. I know." The reactor's failsafe sequence accelerated, the energy field destabilizing with violent intensity. Sparks erupted from the walls and the floor trembled underfoot. The executioner charged, its blade humming with lethal energy, but Seryn was ready. She fired, not at the executioner, but at the console behind her. The burst of plasma shattered the controls, sending a surge of feedback through the reactor. The core pulsed violently, releasing a shockwave that threw the executioner off balance. The enforcer staggered, and for the first time, Seryn saw hesitation in its movements. Gripping her rifle tightly, she lunged forward, firing into the exposed gaps in its armor. Sparks flew, and the executioner faltered, its weapon clattering to the ground. The reactor's overload reached critical mass. Seryn's wrist console blinked red, a single timer counting down, 15 seconds. She stumbled toward the Velcran's still form, her heart pounding. "Get up!" she screamed, grabbing his arm. He groaned weakly, his eyes fluttering open. "You're insane," he muttered, coughing. "Hold that thought," she snapped, dragging him toward the emergency hatch. Behind them, the executioner struggled to rise, its movements sluggish as its systems failed. The hatch slammed shut behind them, just as the reactor detonated. The explosion consumed the chamber in a brilliant cascade of light, ripping through the station like a tidal wave. Seryn and the Velcran were thrown into the void, their escape pod spiraling away from the burning wreckage. As the Dominion vessel disintegrated in the distance, Seryn collapsed against the pod's wall, her breath ragged. The Velcran gave a weak chuckle. A message indeed. Seryn looked out at the smouldering remains of Andros Station, her expression resolute. It's only the beginning. As Seryn stares into the void, the smouldering remains of Andros Station behind her, one thing becomes clear. This was just the beginning. If you were on the edge of your seat, show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. The Dominion may seem unstoppable, but so is the will to resist. Remember, every rebellion starts with a spark. Are you ready to ignite yours?